Every time you try to earn her, you teach her to overlook you. The moment you try to be liked, the moment you reach for approval, the moment you adjust your tone, your walk, your truth, to fit what you think she wants, something in you dies. And she can feel it. Not consciously, not logically, but deep down, in the place where attraction actually lives. Something just shuts off, because neediness has a smell. And it doesn't matter how sharp you dress, how much you make, or how clever your words sound. If your energy says, "Please want me," she'll feel it, and she'll pull away. It's brutal, but it's real. See, the modern man has been trained to chase, to impress, to constantly perform value, like a salesman who no longer believes in his product. But the truth is, a man who performs can never be respected, and a man who begs to be seen will never be unforgettable. So what makes her obsessed? Not the loudest guy, not the flashiest one, not the one with rehearsed lines and good cologne. She becomes obsessed with the man who doesn't need her attention, the one who radiates value but doesn't broadcast it, the one who's deeply present, not for her approval, but because that's who he is. This man doesn't impress. He leaves an imprint. He doesn't chase desire. He becomes its gravitational center. And here's the twist. That kind of man isn't born. He's built from the inside out, through inner shifts, through quiet work, through the uncomfortable, unsexy process of unbecoming everything he's been told he has to be. This video is about those shifts. We're not here to teach you lines, moves, or strategies. We're here to rewire your presence so that women don't just notice you, they feel you, remember you, and crave the stillness that only you seem to carry. Let's begin. You don't react. You lead. Emotionally. Most men don't realize how much control they surrender simply by reacting. Too fast, one glance, one silence, one K text, and suddenly, their heartbeat doubles. Their brain starts scripting scenarios. She's pulling away. She's losing interest. What did I do wrong? Then comes the spiral. A follow-up message, a change in tone, a softening of the self. They say too much. Explain what? Didn't need explanation. And before they know it, she's gone. Not because of the silence, but because he couldn't hold it. That, right there, is where most men lose their power. Not in big dramatic moments, but in subtle ones. In the quiet seconds when her attention shifts and his stability shatters. See, a woman isn't just reading your words. She's reading your center, your energy, your ability to hold the frame when emotions start to move. And here's the secret. She's not testing you to be cruel. She's testing to see if there's anything real underneath the surface. Now picture this. Two men text a woman. She leaves them on read for 5 hours. The first man checks his phone 27 times, sends a follow-up, maybe a meme, then deletes it, then sends it anyway. He feels like his worth is hanging in the balance. The second man, he notices. Then he goes to the gym, finishes his tasks, reads a few chapters of meditations, cooks his dinner, sleeps like a rock. She didn't reply. Okay, why? Because he's not waiting for her to complete him. he's already full. And that, my friend, is a rare kind of energy. Women feel it instantly, even through a phone screen. That calm, that self-possession, that silence that doesn't shrink. It says, I'm not here to be tossed by your tides. I am the tide. That's what makes her lean in. Now let's be clear, this isn't about playing cold. It's about being centered. Because Stoicism isn't the absence of emotion. It's emotional authority. It's not bottling things up. It's mastering when and how you let them out. It's saying, I feel this, but I don't let it lead. That is power. In a world where everyone is triggered, reactive, offended, impulsive, the man who pauses becomes unforgettable. He sees the storm coming. He steps back. He observes. And only if necessary, he responds. Calmly, clearly, consciously. This kind of man doesn't just make a woman feel curious. He makes her feel safe. Not the boring, nice guy kind of safe, but the kind of safe that says, no matter what happens, I won't collapse. And the truth is, most women aren't used to that. They're used to men who flinch at the first sign of withdrawal, men who need constant confirmation, men who lose themselves trying to manage her emotions. But when she meets a man who holds his ground, when she sees that her fire doesn't burn him, it sharpens him. She remembers, because emotional discipline is rare. And in its presence she feels something primal, not just attraction, respect. So if you want to be magnetic, stop looking for the perfect response. Start building your capacity to wait, to observe, to feel the emotion rise and not obey it. Because when you stop reacting, you start leading. And when you lead, she follows, not because you chased her, but because you showed her what it feels like to be around a man who doesn't need anything from her to be whole. That energy, it lingers, it penetrates, it stays. Be the one who doesn't flinch. She'll never forget it. You don't perform. You presence in a world obsessed with performance. Stillness is rebellion. Everywhere you look, men are showcasing. On dating apps, in bars, at work, trying to be funnier, louder, cooler, trying to be seen. But here's the truth. No one says out loud, the men who try to be seen never stay in her memory. It's the man who doesn't try, who just swore that she can't forget. Let me take you to a rooftop party in LA. Music's on, lights are low, drinks in hand. You've got the usual cast of characters. The overcompensator, talking too loud, laughing at his own jokes. The peacocker, gold chain out, shirt halfway unbuttoned, scanning for validation. The nice but nervous guy, smiling too much, agreeing with everything. And then there's this one man in the corner. No flash, no flinch. He's not trying to entertain or win anyone over. He's just there, grounded, comfortable in his skin, observing, listening, occasionally smiling, not performatively, but like someone who genuinely enjoys the quiet. Women notice him, but he doesn't notice being noticed. He's not magnetic because he says something brilliant. He's magnetic because he doesn't need to say anything at all. That's the paradox. The less you try to be interesting, the more interesting you become. You see, real presence isn't noisy. It's not a shout. It's a signal. Deep, quiet, undeniable. Most men live like fireworks. Flashy, loud, gone in seconds. But a Stoic man? He's a flame. Steady, silent, always there. And slowly, irresistibly, people are drawn in. Because the nervous system doesn't respond to effort, it responds to energy. And when your energy says, "I'm already whole, I don't need this moment to prove anything," you immediately create contrast, and contrast is what creates intrigue. It's why some of the most captivating people in the world barely speak. Why some of the most desired men aren't the best looking. They're the calmest, the most self-contained. It's not about being mysterious on purpose. It's about being so rooted in yourself that you don't need to reach. When a man reaches, it feels off, even if he says all the right things, even if he's dressed the part. There's this subtle strain behind the charm, but when he stops reaching, when his presence becomes enough, that's when she starts leaning in. She doesn't even know why. There's just something about him, something unspoken, something felt. That's what presence does. It bypasses her logic and speaks to her nervous system. It says, "You're safe here, you don't have to perform either." And in that space she relaxes, opens, feels. Here's the thing. The world keeps telling men to stand out, to market themselves, to build a brand. But you're not a brand. You're a man. You don't need to build attraction. You are attraction, if you can just be still long enough to let her feel it. So how do you cultivate that? You stop chasing moments to prove yourself. You stop interrupting silence just to be noticed. You learn to sit, fully, in your own space. To walk into a room without adjusting your volume, your posture, or your truth. And when people come, they come. When they don't, you remain. Because you're not here to win attention. You're here to own presence. And the men who own their presence, they don't need to say much. They don't need to convince. They don't need to impress. They just walk in, and the room adjusts to them. Masculine Stoic tone and the paradox of attraction through freedom. 3. You don't control. You contain. Control is an illusion. And yet, most men chase it like their masculinity depends on it. They over-explain. They question. They demand clarity. They set ultimatums disguised as boundaries. Why? Because deep down they're scared. Scared of uncertainty. Scared of losing her. Scared of the space between now and the next reply. So they squeeze. Hold tighter. Try to manage everything. Her moods, her reactions, her distance. But here's the paradox. The more you try to control her, the less safe she feels. Because control doesn't feel like love. It feels like fear in a suit. Let me tell you a story. There was a man I once knew. Let's call him Mark. He was deeply in love, strong, intelligent, loyal. But he had one flaw. He needed to keep things in check. Every time his girlfriend went out, he had to know who she was with. When she didn't text back for an hour, he'd spiral. He masked it as caring, but it was anxiety with a mask on. One night she told him, "You never let me breathe." And that was the beginning of the end. Because what women crave isn't dominance. It's containment. They don't want to be owned. They want to feel held by something stronger than their chaos. Not by force, but by presence, by calm, by certainty. Imagine a river. What makes the river beautiful isn't the water. It's the banks. The flow is wild, feminine, emotional. But the banks, the frame, give it shape. Without the banks, water floods. It loses direction. It becomes dangerous. That's what you are as a man. Not the force that tries to stop her flow, but the strength that lets her flow freely, without losing herself. This is what true masculine energy does. It doesn't control. It contains. And containment is quiet. It doesn't need lectures. It doesn't need rules posted on the fridge. It's a felt sense, a vibration that says, "You're free, but this is my line." Not a threat, a truth. A woman feels safe not because you've removed all her choices, but because your center never wavers when she explores them. And here's the twist. When she feels free inside your presence, she chooses to stay. Not because she has to. Not because you convinced her. But because she feels seen and safe without being suffocated. Now, this doesn't mean you have no standards. Containment isn't passive. You still walk away from disrespect. You still speak truth. You still know your non-negotiables, but you enforce them without emotional chaos, without trying to manipulate or guilt trip. Just a calm line in the sand and the strength to walk if it's crossed. That's rare, and that's what makes it powerful. Because here's what women are rarely told. A man who tries to control everything does so because he's scared to lose it. But a man who trusts himself to contain doesn't need to. So the next time you feel the urge to ask, to explain, to pressure, pause. Ask yourself, am I doing this from strength or from fear? Because she'll feel the difference. And you will too. You don't need to be her cage. You need to be her ground. The still place she returns to when her world gets loud. Because when you stop trying to control her, you give her the gift she never knew she needed. Freedom inside structure, wildness inside safety. And that's when she truly opens. You don't reveal everything. You let her discover mystery isn't a trick. It's not a game. It's the natural byproduct of depth held with restraint. Most men mistake openness for connection. They overshare. They rush to spill their pain, their past, their plans, hoping to seem honest, real, different. But what it often communicates is this: I need you to understand me, so you don't leave. And that energy, it's heavy, it's needy, it's premature intimacy, and it kills attraction before it has time to grow. Now don't get it wrong, how vulnerability matters, but timing matters more. A beautiful story told too early becomes noise. A deep truth, revealed before trust, feels like pressure. Think of the greatest books you've ever read. They don't start on page 1 with the ending. They build, they unfold. Each chapter deepens your curiosity, opens another door, pulls you further in. You don't keep reading because the author begged you. You keep reading because the energy of the story makes you want to stay. That's what you are. Not a resume, not a performance. A story, meant to be discovered, not dumped. Let me tell you about a man named Eli. Eli wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to impress. In fact, he often said less than anyone in the room. But there was something about him. A feeling that he had layers. Women were drawn to him. not because he was mysterious on purpose, but because he didn't need to prove anything. He didn't interrupt. He didn't overshare. He simply existed, with a quiet intensity, like there was a whole world inside him, and he was in no rush to explain it. Over time, people leaned in. They wanted to know more, and every time he opened just a little, it felt earned. It felt real. That's the secret. A man who reveals too much too soon feels insecure. A man who reveals just enough feels inviting, because women don't fall in love with everything they know about you. They fall in love with the parts they get to discover. So how do you live that energy? You become comfortable with not being understood right away. You don't fill every silence. You don't narrate your soul. You allow her to ask, to wonder, to earn the next layer. Not because you're manipulative, but because you have depth. And real depth doesn't hand itself out in the first conversation. This doesn't mean being cold or cryptic. It means being grounded. You answer questions without over-explaining. You tell stories without fishing for sympathy. You show who you are through action, not autobiography. Because in the age of oversharing, restraint is power. Everyone's trying to be seen. But the ones who hold something back, not out of fear, but out of fullness, they become unforgettable. And this isn't just about romance, it's about energy. When you don't leak your life out in search of connection, you become the kind of man people respect before they even know why. You become a mystery, not because you're hiding, but because you're whole enough to wait. You don't demand interest. You invite it. You don't perform depth. You are deep, and your silence speaks louder than most men's monologues. So next time you feel the urge to explain yourself, don't. Breathe. Smile. Let her wonder, because when you stop handing out your story like a brochure, she'll lean in and want to write the next chapter with you. You don't need to win. You hold the heavy silence. Not every battle deserves your sword, and not every comment deserves your reply, but most men forget this, because we're wired to prove, to defend, to correct. She questions your intention. You explain. She accuses. You argue. She pokes at your ego. You fight back, trying to come out on top. But here's the Stoic truth. The moment you need to be right, you've already lost. Because now, you're in her frame. Her emotion leads. Her tone dictates. Her chaos owns your peace. Real strength isn't seen in the power to strike. It's revealed in the power to stay still. Let me take you into a familiar moment. You're on a date. Things are going well. Then suddenly, a small jab, a snide comment, a test, a flick at your confidence. She must be joking, you think, but it lingers. Now 2 paths open up. Path 1, you get defensive. You laugh nervously. You start explaining yourself, or worse, you counterattack. And just like that, the energy collapses. You've stepped into the emotional tug-of-war and dropped your frame. Path 2, you don't flinch. You hold eye contact. You take a sip of your drink, and with calm, deliberate silence, you let her words echo into nothing. That silence, that stillness, that's where power lives. Because she didn't need you to fight back. She needed to feel your center. See, many women test not to destroy your peace, but to see if it's real. They've met charming. They've met funny. They've met smooth, but the man who can take a hit, and not react? That's rare. That's different. Because silence, when held with calm presence, speaks louder than rebuttals. It says, I don't need to prove myself here. I don't play games. You can poke, but you won't move me. This doesn't mean being cold. It doesn't mean being passive-aggressive. It means knowing your value so deeply, you don't trade it for momentary validation. You know what's truly intimidating? A man who doesn't raise his voice, who doesn't need the last word, who, when insulted, just smiles, because his worth doesn't live in her opinion. That's not weakness. That's emotional sovereignty. And here's the paradox. The man who can walk away from the argument is often the man she wants to follow. Why? Because he's not trying to win her. He's winning himself. When you stop needing to be right, you start becoming irresistible, because you no longer fight for power. You are power. Quiet, stable, immovable. Next time you feel provoked, pause. Feel the fire rise. Watch the impulse to defend, to argue, to explain. Then, choose stillness. Let your silence carry weight. Let your breath speak more than your mouth ever could, because the man who doesn't engage in small wars is always busy building an empire inside, and that's what she feels. Even if she can't explain it, even if she rolls her eyes or smirks or shrugs, deep down, she knows. This man isn't like the rest. And once she feels that, she never forgets. You don't need to be understood. You let her feel you. Slowly, most men crave one thing they'll never admit: to be deeply understood. They want someone to see them, get them, know the reasons behind the silence, the grind, the scars. So they explain. They open up too fast. They narrate every detail of their past and personality, hoping it will lead to intimacy. But here's what they don't see. Trying to be understood too early actually pushes her further away, because it shifts the energy from calm presence to emotional negotiation, from confidence to justification. You're no longer the quiet mountain. You're the man standing beside it, begging her to believe you built it. But real depth doesn't introduce itself. It doesn't say, hey, just so you know, there's a lot to me. It just is. It lets her feel it, slowly, moment by moment. Let me tell you a story. There's a man I knew. Let's call him Seth. Seth wasn't loud. He didn't talk about his goals or past heartbreak or spiritual depth in the first hour. He simply listened. Not to respond, but to witness. When he spoke, it was deliberate, not rehearsed. And what stood out wasn't the words, but the space around them. That calm, grounded stillness that made you lean in without even realizing. Women would say, there's something about him I can't explain. And that was the point. He wasn't a puzzle to solve. He was a presence to feel. Because here's the secret. A man with real depth doesn't ask to be understood. He allows himself to be experienced, and that's rare. Because it requires one thing most men avoid: patience. The patience to be seen, slowly, to let her curiosity unfold on its own, to allow mystery to build instead of being rushed away. See, most men hate ambiguity. They want to know where they stand. They want to say, here's who I am, what I want, and what you should think of me. But the more you try to define yourself for her, the less she gets to discover you. And women, especially those with real emotional intelligence, don't fall in love with everything they know on day one. They fall in love with what they uncover, little by little. They don't want a man who lays his soul bare too soon. They want a man whose soul invites them in without saying a word. This doesn't mean being distant. It means being unapologetically yourself, even if she doesn't fully get it yet. It's in your silence, your stillness, the way you're okay, being misunderstood for a little while, because you're not performing. You're not explaining, you're living, and letting her catch up at her own pace. That kind of man changes the room. He doesn't demand connection. He creates space for it to happen. And because he's not rushing, she feels safe to move closer. She'll start asking questions, leaning in, studying you in quiet moments, trying to piece together the mystery. And when she finally feels like she's getting you, it won't be because you told her. It'll be because you let her feel it day by day. So next time you're tempted to over-explain, don't. Next time she says, "I don't get you," just smile. Let her wonder. Because the man who doesn't need to be understood becomes the one women long to understand. Not with logic, but with their entire being. And that kind of connection, that's not just attraction, it's obsession. You don't let emotion lead, you stay on mission. There's something devastatingly rare in this world. A man who feels deeply, but stays unmoved, not cold, not shut down, but anchored, like a mountain that lets the storm rage and never forgets its peak. Most men crumble when emotion hits. They fall in love and suddenly their mission fades. The gym slows down. The focus scattered. The standards compromised. They don't even notice the shift until they wake up one day, unsure who they are without her gaze. But a stoic man, he loves without losing himself, because he knows this truth. Emotion is a guest, not a guide. It's welcome to visit. It's not allowed to drive. Let me tell you about a man named Darren. Darren was building something, a vision he'd been chasing for years. He met a woman who lit him up like nothing else. She was fire, warm, wild, intense. For a while, they burned bright together. But slowly the fire asked for more than fuel. It asked for sacrifice. Skip the meetings. Delay the launch. Choose us over that. Most men would fold. Justify it. Call it love. But Darren paused. He looked at the map of his life and he said, "I care about you, deeply, but I made a vow to something bigger than us, and I won't break it, not even for love." She was stunned, not because he rejected her, but because he didn't reject himself. That moment didn't drive her away. It pulled her in. With respect, because women can feel when a man's grounded in something deeper than desire. And that grounding, it's intoxicating. Not the kind that begs, not the kind that follows, but the kind that leads. A man on a mission doesn't neglect love, he elevates it. Because everything he offers comes from overflow, not abandonment of self. His woman doesn't get the scraps of his purpose. She gets the best of him because he lives on purpose. That's the shift, when you stop chasing emotional highs and start building emotional integrity, where your joy doesn't depend on a text, where your focus doesn't vanish after one kiss, where your mission remains, Not because you're heartless, but because you're whole. And here's what most don't realize. Women aren't drawn to the man who puts them above all. They're drawn to the man who puts truth above all and brings them into it. Because that man, he doesn't bend with every breeze. He creates the weather. She sees that, and something ancient in her responds. Because in his presence, she's not the center of his world. She's the woman beside a man with a world worth orbiting. You don't need to push her away. You don't need to say, my work comes first. You just need to live it. Steady, clear, unapologetic. Not as a shield, but as a rhythm. The rhythm of a man who knows why he wakes up in the morning and never forgets. And when emotions rise, as they will, you don't suppress. You don't explode. You feel. You stay. You choose the mission anyway. Because your love is real, but your purpose is sacred, and she'll feel it. In how you say no without guilt. In how you say yes without need. In how you let your heart beat loud, but your steps stay aligned. That kind of man, he's not just attractive. He's unforgettable because he reminds her and the world that devotion to something bigger than the moment is the most seductive strength of all. The man who stays on his mission even when the world tugs at his heart leaves behind a different kind of footprint. One that doesn't vanish when the season changes. One that becomes legend. And it's not just about the mission. It's about how he holds himself in the quiet between action. Because in the end, it's not the loud that lasts. It's the silent force. Let me show you what that looks like. His name was Javier. Not a model. Not a billionaire. Just a man who walked with the weight of something sacred on his shoulders. He ran a local boxing gym. Nothing fancy. Concrete floors, rusty lockers, the smell of sweat and focus. But people came, not just to train, but to feel something they didn't know they were missing. Javier barely spoke. Not because he was shy, but because he knew that words were like punches. The fewer you throw, the more they count. One day, a woman named Lana joined the gym. Confident, sharp, the kind of presence that turns heads when she walks in. She was used to attention, used to men bending their tone, their spine, their schedule. But Javier didn't flinch. He said hello, showed her the ropes, then left her to find her own rhythm. No compliments, no stares, no special treatment, and that shook her, because for the first time she wasn't being pulled into a performance. She was just in the presence of something still, something immovable. Over weeks, she observed him, how he moved, how he watched people, not judging, not approving, just witnessing, how he corrected form with a glance, how he broke up sparring matches with a nod. One evening she asked, "Why don't you talk more?" Javier looked at her for a moment, then said, "Most people already know what they need to hear. They just need someone to hold space until they hear it themselves." That night, she stayed late, just to be around that stillness. And what began wasn't a chase. It was a quiet orbit. She didn't know why she wanted to be near him. She just did. Because when a man holds silence with confidence, it doesn't feel like distance. It feels like gravity. This is the paradox most men miss. They think silence means nothing's happening. But in truth, silence is when everything starts moving underneath. We live in a culture of constant noise, updates, reactions, proving, posing, performing. Men talk fast because they fear invisibility. They overshare because they fear irrelevance. They chase because they're scared of being forgotten. But the man who doesn't need to be remembered is the one she can't stop thinking about. Why? Because silence, when paired with presence, becomes music. A symphony without sound. A calm that touches nerves she didn't know were tense. And it's not passive. It's active stillness. It's choosing in every moment not to be pulled out of your center. It's standing in a room feeling the pull to impress and choosing to remain grounded. It's listening without waiting to speak, watching without needing to act, holding space without needing to fill it. That kind of man isn't just attractive, he's unforgettable. Because he's not trying to be. So what do you take from this? You don't need to change how you talk. You don't need to master perfect lines. You don't need to chase anything. You need to return. Return to stillness, to breathe, to the power that doesn't shout, but stays. Because in a world where men are taught to conquer with volume, you'll become the one who conquers with gravity, and she'll feel it, not in what you say, but in what you don't need to. You don't have to perform to be powerful. You don't have to speak louder, move faster, or chase harder. Because the men who truly shape the world do so without needing to be seen. This isn't about becoming silent to hide. It's about becoming still to reveal the kind of presence that doesn't demand attention, but naturally commands it, not through force, but through stillness sharpened by purpose. You see, real attraction isn't a tactic. It's not about perfect lines, expensive watches, or curated charisma. It's the quiet confidence of a man who doesn't need anything from anyone to feel whole. A man who's met his own shadows, wrestled his own chaos, and chosen peace anyway. When a man no longer seeks to impress, that's when he begins to influence. He doesn't try to convince a woman to like him. He simply lives with so much alignment that she feels safe, challenged, and captivated, all at once. Not because he chased her, but because she can sense he's chasing something greater, and she wants to be part of that orbit. That's what women feel when you don't explain yourself, when you don't fold under pressure, when you let your silence speak and your mission lead. Because in that silence, she senses weight. In your restraint, she feels intensity. And in your presence, she glimpses a man who could walk away at any moment, not out of arrogance but out of clarity. And that clarity? It's rare, it's priceless, it's magnetic. But here's the real truth most men avoid. You can't fake this, you can't script it, you have to become it. It takes work, not outer work, but inner work. Hours of uncomfortable honesty, decisions that make you proud in private. Moments where you walk away not to punish, but to protect your peace. That's the man this world needs more of. That's the man she won't forget. And most importantly, that's the man you once knew you could become. So if this video reminded you of a part of yourself you buried, if something in these words pulled on a thread you almost let go of, then don't just click subscribe. Subscribe to the path back to yourself, back to the man who doesn't need noise to be noticed, who doesn't need validation to feel valuable, who doesn't need a stage to be seen. He's not desperate. He's devoted to discipline, to depth, to truth. Because when you become that kind of man, you stop chasing women and start attracting respect. You stop pleasing people and start elevating rooms. You stop searching for who you should be and finally rest in who you are. So pause. Breathe. Look in the mirror, not to fix anything, but to remember everything you've always had inside. That is where your power lives. And the moment you stop reaching outward is the moment everything you've been waiting for starts moving toward you.